Now we're going to take a look at Tiger Woods' backswing, and we're going to kind of follow his hip turn. Right now his belt buckle is basically facing the golf ball, and we're going to kind of look at that belt buckle as he moves into his backswing and to see how far around it turns. Now if his belt buckle turns 90 degrees and is facing the camera, then that belt buckle will be facing this way. If it turned to here, that would be something like 45-degree turn. So let's look at his backswing here. So I pull it back. Here's his belt buckle right here. That belt buckle is pointing somewhere in this general area from where the ball was. So he's turned his hips quite a bit. Now he's going to turn his shoulders a lot more, so in relationship to his shoulders, he doesn't turn his hips near as much. But there's no question that he turns his hips in his backswing. Now I want us to watch this part of his shirt, that little stripe in his shirt right here, and let's watch how much that turns as I just kind of go back and forth here. You can see that Tiger's definitely turning his hips. Now we're going to look at his hip turn on the downswing. Now when he starts out, he's pretty square to the ball. I cannot see Tiger's left back pocket, so he's pretty square to the target line. So his hip line is pretty much parallel to his target line. Now as I take it back, turn his hips 30 or 40 degrees as he comes down into the golf ball. Now, these other drawings are from the telecast of the TV show this is from. Now as he comes into the ball, he has not yet hit the ball, but we now can see that he's turned his hips where his belt buckle now is facing in front of that golf ball. I can see his left back pocket. So at impact, Tiger has his hips open to the target line about 30 or 40 degrees. So he has turned his hips more forward toward the target at impact. Now his shoulders have not turned as much, so his hip turn is kind of like this, and his shoulder turn is still about right here. So he's unwound his hips further than he's unwound his shoulders. And so the lower body will always be leading in this unwinding into the golf ball. Now let's take a look at that initial move in the downswing. And I want you to pay particularly attention to his right elbow and right hip. These 2 points will stay very connected. Put a little circle here and here, and they stay very connected. Watch how that right hip pulls everything around. The downswing starts from what they've kind of commonly said, starts from the ground up. You don't start with the hands and disconnect the hands and arms from the torso. The hands and arms are not the engine of the downswing. They are simply passengers, taking the ride. It's the core. It's hitting the ball with your core of your body, your hips, your trunk. And it pulls everything with you right there. So learning how to load the hips and legs and unload the hips and legs. The upper body is kind of following, but the real driving engine of the golf swing is the lower body. And you have to have not a passive lower body, but an active lower body. And in order to have this powerful unload of the hips, you have to first have a load of the hips. You have to load the hips and then unload them. You have to load them with the turn and then unload them. Now we're going to take a look at Rory McIlroy. Take his swing back. We can easily see his belt buckle here, and that belt buckle is facing, some would argue that's even further than 45 degrees. So let's look at his downswing now, and you can see again as we watch the connectedness of Rory's elbow and hip here coming down as a unit. That lower body drive right there is the engine and the power element of the golf swing. The hands and arms are following. They're kind of just along for the ride as the actual power hit comes from the lower body. Now we're looking at Grant Wade. Let's look at his hip turn in the backswing and downswing. And he's backswing. You can see how much he turns his hips. Again, his belt buckle is facing somewhere here, and the same as the other examples we've looked at. At impact, I can see both back pockets. His hips have turned further than his shoulders through impact. So the engine of his swing is the lower body. Now let's take a look at Rory from a face-on view. You can really see how he turns his hips. His belt buckle is about right here toward the ball at its setup. But his belt buckle is way over here now. He's really coiled. Now his shoulder turn is much further than his hip turn because he's restricted the hip turn by keeping a stable axis on his left side, and that creates a resistance, so the hips cannot turn as much as the shoulders, but they still turn almost to their fullest extent possible with the left foot down. And let's take a look at as he comes through. You can see that lower body drive. He's loading and then unloading the trunk of his body. Now we're going to look at Hunter Mahan in the face-on view. Those hips at this point have really turned quite a bit. His hips started in this direction, and now that belt buckle is way over here. So a really strong turn in his hips. Now his shoulders have turned further, but there's no question that he has turned his hips. Now, one of the things that causes the hips to not turn as far as the shoulder is he keeps his left foot down, so there is a stabilization of the lower body by keeping that left foot kind of anchored to the ground. His axis for this turn is his left side. And now if he were to lift his heel up in the air and shift his weight to his back foot, he would turn his hips even further, but that becomes a point of diminishing return, and so there is a built-in stopping point of the hips, and you don't have to consciously try to restrict the hips. They will stop on their own because of the anchoring to the ground from the left side. So as long as you keep your center of gravity and keep your weight on this left side, that will put in an automatic stopping point for the hips. So you want to have a natural, unthinking turn of the hips and not try to restrict them at all. And so both the hips and the shoulders will both turn naturally to their full extent that is allowed by the mechanics of their body.